And that was very interesting. Really, really good musicians they were. And as they played their guitars, we took their gestures of their fingers and we projected on the big screen. The whole idea for those musicians who never worked with tech before was very much about experiencing feedback rather than just audio feedback. And when you create a situation like that, it's very interesting because if you work with ICT or multimedia and people are used to one type of stimulus, and you introduce another type of stimulus, and you talk to them about that. How was that? Did it change your performance, etc.? It becomes very interesting. So a lot of what I'll be presenting today is along those lines, whereas I started with music, but then, as you see, I went into the more visual arts. So people call me Tony. Anthony's my name, but you can call me Tony. I'd like to quickly say thanks to the team. Pedro's been fantastic online to me. And some of the keywords that, if you do look at my research, it's 200, not 2,000. This is close to 200, not 2,000. I wish it was 2,000. But soundscapes was the main body of my research. Nowadays, we're working much more with games. And since '98, we used to work with Macromedia Flash, before the Adobe days, creating interactive games. And then art habilitation, where we work with music, we work with images, we work with robotics that are controlled from gesture. So this was a long time before the Kinect and the Wii, this type of thing, and the iToy. So we were in LA in the summer at HCII, and we saw a street named after me, of course, just off Venice Beach. Just to clear myself, if you have any questions, all the images are covered for me to show in public. So I'll be told, I don't know if we can permit the recording to go public afterwards, but for you to see some of the recordings and some of the images, they're quite sensitive, but I have full permission to show, just to say. And I'd like to say what I'm not, because Pedro was very kind. He told you what I am, well, very shortly. I'm a professor up in Aalborg University in Denmark. I'm a director of what's called the Sensorama Lab, which is virtual reality, human behavior, interaction design, games. And we have a team of postdocs there. Some came up from EPFL in Lausanne. But the main thing, what I'm not a therapist. So don't ask me any questions on therapy. I was in Porto in 2002 and somebody asked me a psychology question, and thankfully somebody in the audience answered the question for me. So I'm not a therapist, but what I do is I work very much with therapists and neurologists, neuropsychologists, and what have you. So that gives me a bit of a license to ask questions in a different way than perhaps if I was distinct in the field. What I do is very transdisciplinary, so hopefully it'll make sense as we go further. And terminologies is something I've had a problem with over the many, many years. Different countries use different terminologies. So in case you're a PC, politically correct person, and you're going to come and say, hey, listen, you're using the wrong word. In Denmark, we have different words for certain things. So if I do use certain terms, I'm trying to cover my back on this one, okay? I looked at the Rehab 2015 site, and I extracted some text. And ICT, of course, is core to my work. But I highlighted motivation because I have an emergent model based on motivation. And the motivation that I work with is, I have two models. One is about inaction, and one is on action. And it's basically looking at the motivation of the person that's participating as a subject, but also for the person who's conducting the intervention, the facilitator. Because the whole point of what I do is to try and engage and motivate people to participate in sessions. I had a bit of a quandary when I decided, what shall I show you? 30 more years of research. And shall I show you some high-tech, some latest stuff? You probably know a lot of that. Shall I show you the history? But I decided to show you a bit of both. And the Oculus Rift, anybody who doesn't know the Oculus Rift? You all know the Oculus Rift. Nearly, okay. I'm going to show you this because I found it, and it's a little video to show you some of the latest tech. Here we go.
Medium is Oculus's creation platform. It's digital clay, and we're building it for anyone.
I'm not a virtual guy. I just love reality. I mean, as a sculptor, it's all about being real.
I didn't know what to expect. I've never seen anything like it before.
Yeah, I'm 100% analog. In fact, I don't even have Wi-Fi in my studio.
At first, I thought, this isn't going to be real. I was thinking very flat. And all of a sudden, when I realized I could reach my hand around and cut shapes and twist shapes, I got very excited.
Pull the trigger under your index finger. That's how you add clay.
Ah, I see.
Got it.
I suddenly realized that the traditional 3D program, it's like working with one hand tied behind your back. With the Rift, I can rotate it as I sculpt it, the way you would clay on a potter's wheel.
When I was using Medium, I was thinking about something in my head, and before even thinking about what it was, I just put it out there.
I was super excited. The experience itself is truly incredible. In fact, I don't know how it would get much better.
It's unlike any other tool that I've used before. There's not a real secret to starting it. It's just having fun with it.
For lack of a better word, it's a psychedelic experience.
It's a tool that I feel like I could use right now.
It's really real, and it's really fun.
So what caught me a bit about this was, yes, the technology, but also about the motivation and the engagement by the people. They were artists. And a lot of what I do is to try and allow people to express themselves creatively, to play, and to enjoy, have fun. And through that experience, that gives a chance for looking at that person, how they move perhaps beyond limits that they otherwise put upon themselves. So this is the type of thing that hopefully will make sense to you when we get to some of the later slides about the painting, interactive sounds. And that's happening now, the Oculus Rift. There's other programs with this 3D painting in virtual space. But going back to the background, this was my little improvised talk, if you like, where this is what I used to use with my uncle, who was into his music. And he couldn't move his hands, he couldn't move his feet, but he could move his body. So he could have some pressure from his elbows on a simple pedal like this. And I could allow him to control different aspects of the music. So very simple things about volume and different things like that. And then as I would play some stuff on my bass guitar, I was a bassist, he could change things based on what. And that control, that empowerment was very, very important for him, but it was also very important for the communication between us. So communication has been a very core aspect of my work. And when I made the first sensors, before this I was working with biofeedback. I put sensors on the body, so I get biosignals coming from my body. I can map that information to the sounds I was working with and later to visuals. But then I wanted to work with sensors that you didn't have to put on people, because that was very restrictive. People used to have to gel them up for brain signals. You have to be very careful where you place sensors to get no noise information from a person from inside the body. So I wanted to work with gesture, and these were the early iterations. They were lights originally, and then you can see on top they're infrared. And they're volumetric sensors. And this was about early 90s. And they were quite interesting. And why there was three instead of just one is that when you work with image and you work with color, you have RGB, for example. So every color you want to work with, you can control through three streams of information, where one is mapped to red, one is mapped to green, one is mapped to blue. So by movement within a space, somebody can color and paint something. And that could also be mapped to a drum, a saxophone, a piano, this type of thing. And those different options is where you can tailor the system and the environment, the interactive environment, to someone's preferences. If they like music, if they like visuals, if they like controlling robotics, this is the type of thing you can do. And then Roland came out with some machines, and I was able then to control the visuals. This is very early on, where I can move in front of these infrared beams. So infrared was the core of this technology. And the problem, there's always a problem. Whenever you work with sensors, there's always a limitation. And with the sensors that were being used at that time, the range was up to about, let's say, 1.5, 2 meters. But I found through my research that you could extend that to about 14 meters. And that meant you could work with full body, with balance, with rotation, with many, many different things. And that came about through work with retroreflective materials. And you could either create a space where someone could walk into and generate information, or you could put this on their body like motion capture. You've seen the Lord of the Rings, the Golem character. You've probably seen the marks on his body, and then they map that to an animated character. So it's all the same materials. And later, if we get to it, we talk about this mirroring of an animated character and the potential of mirroring within rehabilitation. So I worked with different profiles of sensors. The infrared was volumetric over there, you can see. But that was a limit in itself. And then you start working with different profiles according to what the information we wanted for that person to experience different things. So we worked with cameras and we worked with ultrasound, which was linear. And by mixing this information up, you could capture that and put it into different environments to control and stimulate that person. So I was working with this within my sessions with rehabilitation. I was also working with this with creating, for museums of modern art, large room-size environments. So people could come in there, experience interaction, and I used to be able to watch them and observe them, and that would inform my rehabilitation sessions, if you like. And my rehabilitation sessions with many, many different types of users used to inform my art. So it was very cross-disciplinary between the art and then rehabilitation. Basically, this is how a very simple setup would be. We'd have a facilitator for the session. We'd have a profile of what the therapist wanted to work with. We'd have a content feedback, what multimedia, whether that was sound, visuals, or robotics, and the participant. We would create spaces around the person, and that could be two. The video I show you afterwards will be 2 spaces around a guy who was 5 years of age, controlling a virtual reality game from about 2000 it was. Or we could work around the body, full body, like I said, or rotation of a body mass. So, and if you've read Laban, you know what we mean by we talk with a kinesphere, and that's the space of information around your body as far as you can reach that you carry with you wherever you go. So that information is something that is internal to you to process, or the neural side of things. Okay, so this was from 1996. I was invited over to the Paralympic Games in America. I thought I'd show you this. This performance, this very quick performance, was part of a 2.5-hour performance of my work. The guy on the right-hand side of the stage over here, his name's David. He was an artist. He's got cerebral palsy, and he's working with 2 sensors, 2 volumetric sensors that are mapped to a C pentatonic scale. So it's very, very simple, but hopefully you'll see, and you can put the lights down because it's very bad quality, because it's very old, and it's NTSC, so hopefully... So talking to David afterwards, he told me that it felt like the air around his body was electrified, and he wasn't spasming so much, which was interesting how that feedback happens. So the target of my research over the years has been towards looking at all abilities and looking at the most marginalized, so very, very profoundly disabled. And then all the way through to, like I said, I worked with museums of modern art. So what you say is people without any disabilities. And And this is just like a little festival we had where people were moving through the spaces with, that's her son behind her. So it was very much a communication between people, and this guy was playing a Jimi Hendrix patch. So it was very much a learning curve for me as well, working with these individuals, how it wasn't just a piano or a nice sound. A lot of these guys would love this heavy, heavy sounds. This guy would move his arm through a Jimi Hendrix sound, really heavy, and the carer would stand in a chair and play air guitar. And it was very interesting how that all transformed. And that motivation was very, very positive. The work was conducted mostly in Denmark, but I also worked over in Sweden. And this is working over there. This was about the mid-90s, where we worked with a vibroacoustic platform, speakers and 3 sensors, and the visuals here. So as the girl who's profoundly disabled is moving in the sensor, she's generating sound. That sound is mapped into the vibrations underneath her body. Her feet are moving then in 3 sensors to control the red, green, and blue of this animated image in front of her. So again, it's this motivation, this factor of being allowed to express yourself without someone holding your hands to do a certain exercise. She was motivated. And the carer and the parent, we used to get lots of the evaluations from them. It wasn't really quantified evaluation, more towards saying that her expressions had been extended. Okay. If you want to look further, there's a YouTube site called Sherman56. I haven't got time to show you this at the moment, but there is, I anticipated some evaluation questions coming in, and I've extracted some images from the video, so you can go and have a look yourself where it's movies. But basically, these are some of the comments made by the physiotherapists, and these were the early years of working with a profoundly disabled. This is Michael she's talking about now, who was diagnosed as brain dead in Denmark. But Suzanne, who was the physiotherapist, talked very much about his eye-to-hand coordination, his concentration, his contact and communication with herself and others. So I just put this together for you to have an idea. This is Mats, he had Down syndrome. You couldn't, he was very sensitive. You couldn't hold his hands or anything. To train him, I had to put my arms around his neck to show him the spaces where you interact. And slowly, it took a long time, he really did interact. It was very, very interesting. And he loved sounds. At this time, we were mostly working with sounds. Parents were interviewed. This is their daughter. You can see what she's diagnosed with. So she was spastic paralyzed. And then 2 weeks afterwards, you can see she worked with them for 13 years. So 2 weeks later then, you can just watch the facial expressions. There's the parents commenting again. So this control, this empowerment was very, very important. And it really took time to look at the sensitivities of the movement, because you have to tailor the environment exactly to that person's abilities. And just beyond that, to keep them engaged. So if you know Csikszentmihalyi's work with flow, this type of thing, we're looking at microdevelopment, Fisher's work. And this was another physiotherapist from the rehabilitation of brain injury in Copenhagen. She was quite a luminary in the field, Gita Rasmussen. So we also work with stroke patients, higher functional than what I usually worked with. But again, these three-dimensional spaces. And for each person, you would sit down afterwards and ask them, what did they like, what did they not like? So over time, you could get towards what they wanted. Here's Michael again. He didn't like training, he liked playing. You can see by his face, he used to look at me and say, oh, come on, let's play. And this is Matt's after lots of the training with him around his neck. So they talked very much about this fun of creating in a session, of playing within a session. Then through Gita, I worked for about 5 years at the center in Copenhagen. And we had a funded project, national and funded project, so looked at the motor skills, exercises, memory, concentration. And I can tell you about that afterwards if you're interested in that. But so, okay. So as a part of being in the Copenhagen Center for Rehabilitation of Brain Injury, I presented at WCPT. If you're a physiotherapist, you'll know what that is. And it was quite a challenge for me, being an artist in an environment that's full of therapists, mostly ladies. And it was quite interesting to talk about ICT in those days and using it within therapy. Lots of people really didn't get it and really didn't want to get it. They were quite happy to say, I give this child my love, and that's the care he or she needs. And I said, yes, but maybe some of this fun you can have together can help motivate that child to move more, be more engaged in the sessions. As it turned out, that's what came about. But Science Links Japan, the papers, their virtual interactive space, that was something I coined. It's online, you can have a look at it. I put it in there just as a reference for you. And WCPT, I think it's every 2 years, every 4 years, 2 years I think it is. So you're probably aware of that. So working with also robotics, I was sponsored by a Danish company that made disco lights. And these lights had a base, and they were, the first lights I worked with were mirrors inside of them. So you could control the mirrors by your gesture. So the lights would come onto the mirror, and you could control the lights going around the room, like the architecture within a disco environment. But then we had moving headlights, which were a physical head moving controlled by your gesture. And that was much more interesting because you had a mirroring of the person's movement with robotic movement. So if any of you work with robotics, you'll have an idea what I'm talking about. This was, again, late 90s, I'd say. Working with different, this is a linear sensor, the sound beam, been around for many years, and my infrared sensors over there. So these were the years, this was the study I did at the Rehabilitation of Brain Injury in Copenhagen. And this is working with the internet, where we try to do a home-based system where the person would be at the clinic, we'd develop a profile, then we'd send them home with a kit, and very much then we would have that communication to the person assigned to them, the therapist who was assigned to them, to get the information from the internet and to work out so the person could work at home, so using the internet. Again, there's publications called Humanics 1 and 2. You can have a look at that online. Part of that study is working with games, and this was a balance study that we worked with. As you can see, this is a young guy who had a brain injury, and working with trying to keep a glass with water in it on a tray. And some of the variables you could put in that was the friction on the tray, the size of the tray, and to make it right on the edge of his challenge, so he's motivated to be involved. Another game we made was in Macromedia Flash, and this was working with 2 linear sensors. And the game you can see is a fish, and it's catching fish coming down from the top of the screen. Sounds very simplistic, and it was rather, but what was quite interesting about using games was the competition factor. When they used to come into the sessions, the first thing they used to do was look at the score on the board of how many the other person had caught. I'll show you this because this is the therapist dressed in white, the physiotherapist, and the patient down on the left. With working with the 2 sensors, what we did, we worked with a horizontal sensor controlling the horizontal travel of the fish, the interactive fish, which is over there, you can see the big dolphin. And then the therapist in this case is working with the vertical travel. So they had to work together to try and capture the fish. So basically, it's a bit like this, eventually, because the patient works with both sensors. So this should be a little video showing you his progression. Let's have a go here. So he's training with his left side, which is the damaged side with him. So here he is working with both senses now. It was quite hard. It was hard for me, and then he was, after his stroke, he was...
Der går ind og tager sensoren, det er derfor, den ikke kommer helt til højre.
Okay, I'll move on. So we showed this in many different places because it was early use of games within this field. And then we founded a company, and we had lots of games. This was before the Wii and before this... what have you could control. Here's the dolphin. You can see the scores we had down the bottom, the time it took. And these are all, if you like, quantifiable aspects of using the games. So if you're using games in the field, you know what I mean about that motivation factor is very, very strong. And this is the balance thing. So I was eventually on the board of the European Community i3 community, i3net.org, I think it was, that's right, the website. And it was a funded project called TWIASI, and then K here. So the information on this site, this was Framework 5 under the EU. And then, of course, I had lots of money towards the work. And this was working with a youngster over in Sweden, looking at visual feedback on the control through her hands. Starting the company, we started, I had a business guy who saw me a little bit in the early images. He wanted to do a patent. I'm not really into that type of stuff. I'm really into open source. So if you're interested, this is the patent. There's a family of patents based on this communication method and apparatus. So this is the video I referred to earlier on, and I'd like you to watch this because this was the video is from made in 2001. It was from when I was the resident artist at CAVI, the Center for Advanced Visualization and Interactivity at Aarhus University. And this is a young guy, 5 years of age, who can't move anything but his head. His name is Martin. I'm allowed to use their real names because I like giving that respect to them. The parents have given me all that permission. And I won't say too much now because I think the pictures... Oops. Have I gone the wrong way? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Here we go, this one. Martin is 5 years of age. He is dependent on his wheelchair. He can hear and has limited vision, but notices strong colours and follows images with his eyes. We are told that the sounds he makes are indicative of enjoyment in the current activity that he's involved in. This was the first time Martin tried to control the spacecraft. 2 sensors were set up so as to capture the gesture of head movement. Martin quickly recognized that he could affect the spacecraft and often interacts with vigorous side-to-side movements of his head, which results in corresponding movement from the image in front of him. This was a study with 4 young guys about the same age, and we worked with the robotics with these guys as well. And they just had lots and lots of fun. And the carers were with us, of course, all the time, as was the leaders of the institutes. So I come back to Martin afterwards. My last time in Lisbon, I was at the foundation, Guardaris Museum type place. can't remember. It was the Brain Language and Art, Brain and Language Conference. I was given this image because people who are disabled really, really enjoy painting. And when this person was painting, of course, it couldn't happen so often because of the mess that was involved. You had to attach the paintbrush, the paint went everywhere, and for cleaning up it was always a big problem. So then when you work with digital feedback, you can work with no mess, basically. And I've been working with a French artist where I empowered him to express himself through paint, real paint, but also through lights and images and sound, where again, like for example, Jimi Hendrix would make him express himself very abruptly, very staggered, and a smooth synth would make him express himself in a much softer way. So this association between the stimuli was very, very interesting to work with a professional artist like that. So also at the time, I was asked to do a talk for the Danish television channel and the European Film School, where they were questioning how to make classical music more attractive for people on television. And I went in there and said, okay, let's visualize. Take the gestures from violin, timpanis, and the conductor, and you can map that to the environment to get people associated with that. So this was on Danish television, and this wasn't working with the orchestra. They gave me a choir to work with. So how I set it all up, the conductor had obviously worked with the singers for a long, long time. And the other side of his lectern, where he conducted from, I put the three senses, mapped to red, green, and blue, made the animations. The song they were working with was very much towards the Gothic, churchy type of sing-along. And I wanted to see what happened. So I'll play this for you. I'll cut it because it's quite long. It's at the website, Sherman 56. He's wearing a painting suit, which is all white, so we project onto him from behind. We have two projections that are mapped into the corner of a room with a... So where he's putting his hand is controlling the filters, the red, green, and blue filters of the animation. When his hands aren't moving, it's black. The orchestra are in front of him. We're also projecting on them, but... Okay, and what was interesting about that is that we took 5 takes because it was TV, yeah? And it was noticeable between the first take and the 5th take, his movements of conducting the orchestra, the choir. I'm sure the choir didn't need him to conduct anyway because they knew the song. And he started like this and he ended up like this. So I'm asking you now to think about the analogy there between the art side of things and within rehabilitation, where I'm trying to get someone to expand their motion through stimulus. He wasn't thinking of that stimulus, but it was all around him. He was pretty immersed. And the expanse of his movement was totally unconscious. And this was totally outside the field of rehabilitation. So, but that's the type of thing I was targeting within the rehabilitation. Okay, do you have any questions? No? No, sorry, I thought you were gesticulating. So I did the 1996 work in Atlanta, and this was then in Sydney, working with controlling lights through gesture. This was the later interface we worked with. So the hairstyle was about the same then as it is now. And then worked with something called body paint. I'm not going to show that now, but that was basically working with an Italian software called EyesWeb, whereby we could take someone's motion and allow them to control, rather than the lights that you saw with the conductor, but allow them to control the image of their body on a screen as paint. And the amount that they moved was programmed to be a threshold. So as they went above this threshold, they could change the colors. And you'd step through a color chart. And it was very, very effective. It was part of the European project, the Care Here. And we took that forward in many ways. This was presented in China. It was a keynote in China to a team over there. And you can see it behind. As he was moving his hand, he could change the dynamics of his movement and paint in different colors. Very, very immersive again, having fun, and you could also map it to sound, but the prime reason for doing this was towards looking at the visuals, visual stimulus. And then in Porto, I worked at Casa de Musica, and I worked with the symphony orchestra up there by working with the gesture from the conductor and gesture of the orchestra to do interactive visuals and then controlling the lights around them, trying to get to see if they could have a feeling in a different way of the music they were playing. And to be honest with you, it was really problematic with professional musicians. I also worked in New Zealand with an amateur orchestra where the oboe player was hearing impaired, and that was to give people who were deaf access to classical music. And that's available on YouTube at a site. The orchestra was called AOTEA, Aotearoa, from New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. And it was a TV documentary of that youth orchestra. And if I can say that I was able to get them to express themselves in different ways, alongside then with the deaf community that had that access to classical music. To give them access to the classical music, the orchestra was playing. We had game pads, so the sound mixer fed into the game pads so the deaf people could feel the different vibrations, the different dynamics of the music in their body. They were getting visual interpretations, and they were also stimulated through smell. The artist I worked with down there was working with a chemical engineer who made the spray cans, and the air conditioner was sprayed with different smells. And there's some scientific papers been written on it. Very interesting it was. Again in Porto, through the work, through the research, finding out that some people prefer to express themselves in a private space or express themselves within a public space. It was very interesting to see how people wanted to explore by themselves within a space, within these interactive environments, or they wanted to have their friends within the interactive environments. This was one of the private environments, working with very simple camera feedback. This is working with the old feedback, the old TVs we used to have. You point a camera at the TV and you have all this feedbacks going on. I'm looking at the older people in the audience, actually, because it was an old technique we used to do in the days. Lots and lots of fun. And this was working with RGB lights behind the screen and then camera feeding back into this. So this guy was able to control the colors in this space. He was disabled. He was part of a cerebral palsy group that was working at Casa de Musica, interfacing with us. And again, these are children within the workshops Eva and I created in Porto, in Casa de Musica, where they were able to control images and sounds. Out of this, it became very important as well to give, it wasn't just enough to give them this way to express themselves, but we had an A3 printer with us, and we did screen capture, and we printed out then a picture, and we made an exhibition. And there's lots of pictures of these guys. They're so proud of what they created. So at the end of the 2 weeks of the workshop, they were allowed to come back in and get their pictures. And they knew which picture was theirs, which was really interesting because it was very abstract. And then we went down to a conference in Casa de Musica in Porto in the September. This was in the April. And one of the organizers came up to us and said they'd also organized their own exhibition where the people, it was the older people that came into us, were telling about their experiences of creating. And it was very moving. It was very, very special. And their families were involved, so the whole group of people around them was involved. Very, very interesting. So this was some of the exhibition wall. I'll jump over that. So summing up a little bit, talking about, I work closely very much with a therapist. The models I've developed are in action, very much along Donald Schoen's work, in action for looking at strategy and evaluation of the intervention, and on action, the evaluation and recursive reflection and iteration. By iteration, that meant by every session, we were working with the person, learning what that person desired and how they were expressing themselves to redesign and make the environment again. Redesign, make the environment again. So each session, we were changing key issues about the presets. And the reason we work with presets is that in the session, I was the facilitator, and I didn't lose contact with the person when I went down to the ICT to change things. It was very important to keep that close contact with the person in the sessions and just secretly hit a button and just crank it up a little bit more of a challenge. Too much, go back down again. So, and that's the potential of these invisible zones, is you can program the sensitivity, you can program many aspects of these spaces. So the work was presented, a friend presented to a friend who was ex-Harvard University. He was across in Copenhagen, and he was at Rochester University Hospital. He was a pretty high up doctor there. And he told me what I was doing, because I'm not a therapist. I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing it very intuitively and from my tacit knowledge from my birth. He said I was closing this afferent-efferent neural feedback loop, whereby this causal feedback was stimulating them to express themselves. The stimulus was enabling them to do much more. So yeah, I took that on and learned about it. This is one of the models from the intervention, very much about at the point when you're doing an intervention and it looks like they're getting tired or you're losing the engagement, that motivation. When do you change it? Do you change it beyond? Or maybe you change it too far, you have to go back to an earlier period. So this is a simplistic image that I put out there to try and provoke people to have a talk with me about it. And nobody's really taken it on, because to understand what's going on in those sessions, you have to be very aware and think of what's going on in that session, not just using the ICT, but question it from the experience you're having. And those interventions were very much based on improvisation of what's going on, being aware of representations from that person, how they're expressing themselves. So again, there was the researcher involved, the therapist involved, the facilitator. There was different levels within this where you have a goal for the therapist, yet the goal wasn't really up front for the patient. Simplistically, we would create an environment so the person would have an experience. However, behind the scenes, there was lots of things targeted, in so much as the ludic engagement, the fun for the person, the motivation, the aesthetic resonance we talk about in some of the papers. But also down here we talk about the data collection, because you're able to quantify the range of motion, the dynamics of the motion, and that was all informing for the therapist who wanted that specific aspect for the person. And this was looking at the evaluations, looking at each phase of that side of things. You're empowering people, so you're looking at that agency side of things. And I'll come out of this one just to show you this, because working with a commercial game, see if I can move some of these out of the way. Perhaps if I can go to VCL, let's have a look. And because we didn't open it up. Just a second. How are we done on time? I think I got about 15 minutes left, according to my clock up here. Are we okay? Oh, that's good. Multiple answers. I'll just hide PowerPoint. Oh, God. This is because we restarted it. Well, let's do Spotify. There you go. Let's do a search. I just want to show you this. Let's do a... Karen, there you go. Okay. This was a study with fibromyalgia. Perhaps I said it wrong. Do you know what that is? Pain. This is working with the Wii. You probably recognize it. And what we did a 10-session study of these ladies who had fibromyalgia. And the idea was that because they had children and they had a Wii at home, we also worked with the iToy Move and the Kinect. And then this is between the first session or second session and the 10th one. And if you look at the dynamics of the motion, the range of motion, and how she's motivated through that game side of things. So it's very simple, just using a game. Like I said, she's much more able, much more higher functional than some of the others I worked with before. But the arguments, the adoption of games within this side of things is huge. I had looked through some of the papers that are being presented. And I'd like to congratulate you on some of the range of work you're doing. There's games, there's VR side of things. So hopefully this makes a bit of sense to you. And a big laugh at the end. So I got lots of videos of that type of different people, but gives you some idea. Oops. Where are we? Let's look at the window. Ah, wonderful. Isn't technology wonderful? Okay, so so those of you who would like to see some clinical evaluations, a paper on what the research eventually led to. This is a 2010 paper. And it was a randomized intervention study. And you've got the publication there, it's freely available online. So basically, what they found within this study was that you had this difference of 400% within the trainer-specific group with the computer feedback. And this was used in the system, that Personic system that we worked with before, with games. And within our education, Eva and I both teach at the university, our students are working along the same lines with Oculus Rift, with games, with balance, with different autistic children. So if you want to talk about that specific to your study, we're here today, so we're very open to talk to you in the breaks. So please feel free to have a chat with us. I'd like to come back to Martin. I'm near the end of the presentation now. And I'd like to try and stand on my soapbox. If you get, do you use soapboxes in Portugal? You know, people stand on the corner and say their bit. When I went back to the parents and the institute where Martin and the guys were, I wanted to get permission to show the work publicly in as wide a place as I could, because I felt it was very strong, very powerful. But I found out Martin had died. And it was a bit sad. It was very sad. And I thought about what had happened in the research. And I think this is very, very important for anybody doing research, and especially within this field. What I think an aspect, I don't know if this did affect Martin, but we went in there in a pretty high-tech environment. It was an active virtual reality space. The active glasses we were using at that time were too big for him, so he shook them off. So we just drove it in mono. So it wasn't stereo, and it wasn't true VR. But he had a whale of a time. That was like a toy to him and his friends. So we had perhaps half a dozen sessions in there. And he couldn't express himself apart from I. But then he went back to his institute. He went back to his daily life. So we took that toy away from him, and he couldn't tell us, hey, listen, what about my toy? And I think that toy gave him a chance to express himself in a very important way, and we never thought about it at the time. So anybody who's in research, I would totally encourage them to think about the consequences when you go in to get your results, to do your work, and when you go away from that situation. And be aware of leaving stuff there and trying to help the facilitators to use the stuff, even if it's a commercial game, like we did with the fibromyalgia ladies. It's so important to keep that support up. And whenever we try and get funded now within projects, apart from just getting the technology and the research, what we really try and do is we try and get funded to give them a system and to give them training to use the system. And it's so important. So if there's any message you take from this talk, that's the one I'd like you to take with you. So there's some books available. This is the one from last year. There's volume 2 online. This is in press. I was going to finish with this because Microsoft now is very inclusive design. They've got a new toolkit of inclusive design. They're looking at how inclusive design can be used more generically. I came across the Vera, there's a company from San Francisco, San Diego, working with home-based use of the Kinect within this field. And that's about it. So thank you very much.